Welcome to the Linked HR interview series. My name is Chris Wildermuth. I'm a professor at the Adult Learning and Organizational Performance Master's Program at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa, and the chief evangelist for Linked HR, a major HR group on LinkedIn with over 700,000 members worldwide. I have the honor today of talking to Dr. Meg Wheatley, an internationally acclaimed speaker and writer. I last interviewed Dr. Wheatley in 2011 when we discussed the content of the book Walk Out, Walk On, and some of her new thinking since she wrote Leadership and the New Science in 1992. Dr. Wheatley has very recently published a new book, So Far From Home, published by Barrett Kohler. Dr. Wheatley, welcome again. It's such an honor to talk to you, and I've really been looking forward to this conversation a lot.
Well, I'm glad you are interested in my work, so thank you.
I've been devouring your work, so thank you for everything you've written. I go from book to book, and I'm loving every single one of them. So I'm really, and this is very honestly said, I'm completely fascinated by your work and what you've been writing, and I absolutely loved your last book. My first question, if you forgive me, is a little personal. I just wondered how you got to where you are. I thought the people listening to this interview would like to hear a little bit of your story and perhaps how you found your voice as a writer and a leadership scholar.
Yeah. Well, I'm being asked this more now because I am old, and I can look back and I can make up whatever story I want to. So, I do recall a few things. I always felt free inside to just, in Joseph Campbell's phrase, follow my bliss. What that meant for me was that when I look back, I was pretty fearless as a young woman and being out in the world, and traveled quite a lot, was in the Peace Corps in Korea, which was definitely a formative experience when I was just 21, graduated from college, and really welcomed that experience as teaching me how to integrate into any community I was in. Really learn, it was such a foreign, different, traditional society. There was no English, there was no chocolate even, that's how different it was. And fairly soon after the Korean War had ended, so a traumatized society still, very poor. And that gave me, one of my friends, as we left the Peace Corps after 2.5 years, we just looked at each other and said, we can go anywhere now. We learned how to be in this very rough but wonderful environment. We could go anywhere, and that's how I felt ever since. So it's been very easy for me to enter into other cultures and other communities because of that early training. And then the other thing is I just apparently, I didn't create this, but apparently I've just stayed curious. And I remember when Leadership in the New Science came out that I was fearful that I would just settle into that and become one of those people who say the same thing over and over again. And that I also was fearful of becoming a big ego. So I was watching myself for all of that, but it hasn't been hard for me to constantly shift what my books are about. I mean, So Far From Home, this newest book, is my 7th book, and each one, although there's deep thread throughout them, each one is significantly different, and it's written in a different style. It looks different. And that's just because I have, one, the blessing of a wonderful publisher, Barrett Kohler, who will eagerly accept anything I suggest. And so that gives me a kind of creative freedom. I don't have to fit into anybody else's prescriptions about what a book should be. And then I've just had the blessing of being out in the world for so long, meeting so many different people, and loving that. I couldn't stay home at this point because I just need to be out in the world. And being out in the world with my eyes open and trying to discern the trends, what's coming up next, is just one of the gifts I've had, actually. I do see what's coming next in many cases, and now I feel more confident about that. But I just described, I think, my life since 1966, so that's a lot of time. That's 46 years of working out in the world.
Thank you very much for that. I just this question alone, I could stay on it for the whole interview, but I know that we have the other book, the book to talk about. So you did mention So Far From Home, and I thought the first thing that we could do would be your sharing with our listeners the gist of it for those who haven't read it. So could you tell us what the book is all about?
Absolutely, and the subtitle is just as important. The subtitle is Lost and Found in Our Brave New World. And in the book, I describe, I think, quite clearly and quite with a lot of complexity of showing how we have ended up in a world that none of us were working so hard to create. It's a world characterized by the values of greed, consumerism, self-interest, and oppressive power. And these are patterns of these are values that I see in the decisions being made in the countries I work in the most, in Australia, the UK, the Netherlands, South Africa, Canada, and the U.S. Those are my countries of choice to work in now. So the English-speaking democracies is another way of thinking about them. But the pattern of decision-making is so destructive of programs and people that serve good causes, that have been focused on social benefit, community building, social justice, equity. And these, the governments in all of these places are creating a world that is destructive, I would say in summary, of the life force. And of course, we've also destroyed the environment in this process. So my question was, how did we get to this world that is so opposite the values that many of us cherish and that we've been working so hard to embody in practices and programs and communities? How did we end up here? And now that we're here, what do we do? So I do a very detailed description of some of the major forces that created this world. And I also describe it as a world that has emerged, which is not a trivial verb. Anything that emerges cannot be changed. And it possesses property and powers that are very different than the individual actions that gave rise to it. This is a theme that I've covered in a number of my books, from Leadership in the New Science in a Simpler Way in particular. But once something's emerged, you can't change it by just working on little pieces of it. It has its own properties and powers. I try in the book to explain how this world emerged and to see clearly where we are so that we don't go down in despair. It's very easy to go down in despair, by the way. I think that is a dominant and common emotion these days, especially among women, of us feeling such despair of where we are, sadness, grief. And I don't want to discount men, but I'm really picking this up. Women are faster at saying, this is what I'm feeling. Whereas I think a lot of the men don't want to recognize the depth of their grief because they still believe that they're going to create good effects and turn this world around. So what I'm asking for my readers after we go through this darkness is that what could call us forward into even greater resolve and commitment and strength is to accept, take on a new role for ourselves, that of warriors for the human spirit. And I use the word warrior in the Tibetan way, the warrior is one who is brave and brave enough never to use aggression or fear to accomplish their end. But there's a wonderful tradition in Tibetan history of the warriors of Shambhala, which was a kingdom where people were very conscious and awake. And the warriors of Shambhala return at a time when all of life hangs by a thread and their great barbarian powers have arisen. It is now agreed among the Tibetans that this is this time, this dark age. And the warriors of Shambhala have two beautiful weapons, but only two, and that is compassion and insight. So for me, the discovery that when I see clearly, when I really understand what's going on, then I don't push against it in some idealistic way. I don't keep butting my head against a wall. I accept what's going on, and then I choose wise action. And I'm finding that more and more people are eager to step into this role of warriors for the human spirit, people who will try their best to not get taken down by anger, frustration, people who know how to persevere, but who also refrain from using fear and aggression, which is very difficult to do. We could talk more about that. But in general, I'm finding that this is a very noble role of being a warrior for the human spirit, and I have been astonished by the number and variety of people who are really resonating to this call.
And would you see this call possible within organizations as well?
Absolutely. I'm talking to leaders and change agents and saying that we're not going to change the whole system. So I was recently with a healthcare organization, and when I said, you're not going to change healthcare in Canada, they all kind of breathed a sigh of relief. But what I say next is you can work very hard and very skillfully to create this healthcare system or any organization as an island of capacity or an island of sane behavior in the midst of this incredible, raging time of irrational or political or selfish behaviors. You can create within your own domain, within your own sphere of influence, you can create a place that works well to bring out people's best capacities, that works well to create strong, trusting relationships. All the things we thought we could do and turn the larger system around. That was certainly my work for years since Leadership in the New Science came out. But now it's, let's do it. Let's create the changes that we care about using the values that we cherish where we are within our own sphere of influence, whether that's a small team, a whole organization, or perhaps a whole community. Let's work where we are and stand out because we're not going along with the dominant life-destroying values at this time. We're taking back, in fact, this is quite revolutionary, but it's not about changing the whole system. It's just about claiming our work where we are, using values that are important to us, that do bring out people's best capacity, and to see this as an island, not as something that once we do it well, everyone else will want to learn from us and will transform the whole city or the whole nation. That is not going to happen in my estimation. But we certainly can, in a kind of like rebellious attitude, it's like wherever the society is going or our systems are going, let's just stand up and do things differently and be the people that we want to be not because we're going to change the world, but because this just feels like right action. And that's a word I use very consciously of right action, is knowing the work that is ours to do independently of whether we create good impacts. It just feels right to do it no matter what. And of course, that's the tradition of all the great activists. They just discover that this is my work and I'm going to do it no matter what. And if I succeed, wonderful. If I don't succeed, this is still my work.
A couple of questions emerges as you explain this. The first is, and actually that's something I was curious about as I was reading the book, especially since the book sometimes feels pretty dark, pretty pessimistic.
It's incredibly depressing.
Yes. So my question as I was reading it was, is this a cycle? Is this dark age you're talking about something that will eventually recycle somehow, or do you see this as final?
Absolutely. Life is cyclical, and that's true. You know, we're the only culture that has believed that life always gets better and better. This is part of the cycle of history. However, we have to acknowledge that this is the cycle we're in. And when we will pull out of it, I have no idea. I know it won't be in my lifetime. I don't know if it'll be in my grandchildren's lifetime even. But cycles do end. But I think to pretend that we're not in the dark age right now, which is the phrase used in Hinduism and Tibetan Buddhism, that this is the Kali Yuga, the age of destruction. No one knows how long it lasts, but it is just one of the cycles. But I think what we need to do is recognize it, not so that we get taken down in despair, but so that we know what good work is in this era. So it's not about creating transformation. But for me, it is about awakening our better human capacities wherever and so that we don't become barbaric. I mean, what I see happening right now, I've started to characterize as we are devolving as a species because we've just given up on rational thinking, moral judgment, deep, meaningful, intimate relationships. And we're losing, and I do explain why in the book, I think, we're losing these qualities that are the essence of higher human behaviors and skills. We're losing them in our overly distracted, incredibly busy, very aggressive work environments. And then we're losing, I don't see rational thinking even being attractive to people anymore. We're in this culture of opinion, and we just want to look at anything that confirms our opinion, not information that would change our minds. And I have to say, that was one of the most sobering things I realized, is that information no longer plays its role in creating newness and creating meaning and creating change. Right now we're in this global culture of opinion, and it's supported and strengthened by the media. It's supported and strengthened by being asked your judgment, whether you like something or dislike something, everywhere you go, on the internet, but now everywhere as well. And we're just separating into, just look at American politics, we're separating into constant judgment. Nobody changes their mind, or not enough people, by having a reasonable conversation where we explore differences, where we look for common ground. I think the whole notion of common ground has disappeared in the American political environment, and it's starting to happen elsewhere as well. So if we really understand the conditions of this time, then we can choose our work with greater intelligence. And I'm asking that we see our work as creating these islands of sanity or capacity wherever we are. That would be good work. But we first have to give up the larger vision that propelled us forward, myself included, which was we're going to turn this world around. We're going to create, my publisher's phrase, we're going to create a world that works for all. Well, no, we didn't. And it's not up to us. We can't just work harder to make that happen now. We really have to recognize what's going on.
What you were just talking about, this culture of opinion, I was very struck by it in the book itself. Loved that piece. And I wondered what our role as educators would be. So those of us who are in the business of teaching and helping people develop critical thinking, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, that's a wonderful question. Thank you for asking it, because this is going back to wherever we are, creating these islands of sanity or good human behavior. And so in the classroom and with students, we can offer time and patience for students to think well together, to learn skills of reasoning and discernment, to learn how to converse across opinions and, go back to an older time when debating really led somewhere. So people would change their minds. So I think that's our responsibility, and I do see it as in my classroom or my office, what you're going to experience is different than the norm. And you can't just voice your opinion. You can't just make instant judgments. That's where you could really reignite the skills of critical thinking and convivial relationships among students as they discuss big issues. And I think students are hungry for that, actually. I certainly noticed in my own sons, who are now late 20s, early 30s, but they were horrified when other students, when they were in college, would just say, "Oh, well, you're a Republican. I can't talk to you." It's like, what is this about? So they're not enjoying the polarization and the snap judgments that are so common. So I think we have a great opportunity as educators to create these islands of sane behavior, rational thought, critical thinking, and respectful relationships among students. And it's an uphill battle. I mean, we have to consciously take that on as what we will create. I mean, I've had this ongoing argument with one of my sons who's now 32, and he's multitasking to the max. He's quite brilliant, and he gets away with it. I mean, he really does track a lot of different things at once. And he's always on his phone and always on his computer, even though he's got young children now. And I've been going on getting after him about what distraction does to the brain, and that he can't, he's got to put his phone down when he's talking to me, etc. And several months ago, he met with a professor who was in his 70s, and the quality of attention and listening that he felt from that professor, he came back to me and he said, "Mom, you're right." He said, "I've never experienced being listened to in that way before." So that's what shifted him, not his mother's tirade or books. But so we can embody these, these ways of being. And as I said, human beings generally are hungry for this kind of behavior. We're all very stressed at this point and don't really enjoy this feeling of constant overwhelm and busyness and having to deal with unending tasks. I don't find many people who are enjoying it.
One thing that that I wondered as I was reading about this, about the sane behaviors and the islands of sanity, I guess I was clinging to what you said in the book could actually be destructive, and that was hope. Was that,
right.
Is it possible for these islands? Is it possible for us to create a revolution of little islands? But I guess I'm clinging to something I shouldn't be clinging to.
You are.
Right.
Well, that was my earlier work. So, I mean, I have shifted in that I think we need to band together as these little islands, but I don't think by banding together we're going to transform the larger society anymore. But we certainly need to band together, and that's one of the things I'm exploring now in my own work is what are the means, the processes, the structures that can support us banding together and supporting one another in this warrior role, because we can't do it alone. And I'm not proposing that we band together because then something great and good will emerge from that. But if we're going to be strong and make a difference where we are, then we need to have entirely new levels of supportive relationships. In the book I quote a letter from the Civil War era that General Sherman wrote to General Grant after the North had won the war, and Grant was the commanding general. Sherman had just completely burned the South, and they'd won the Civil War. And the letter that General Sherman wrote contained this phrase that I was introduced to when I worked for the head of the U.S. Army in the mid-'90s. And the letter said, I always knew you thought of me, and that if I got in a tight place, you would come, if alive. And when I was read that letter by General Sullivan, he said, Meg, when you understand this, you will understand the heart of being a soldier, the essence of being a soldier. That's a different kind of warriorship. And that's what I put forward in the book. This is our next level of commitment to each other. We have to be there for each other. We can't just, it's so far beyond networking. I don't even want to talk about networking because that's using each other for our own purposes. But this is another level of community, of knowing that I'm going to struggle, you're going to struggle, and if I call you, you're going to call me right back. We have to know that there are small groups of people who are there. We use the phrase at your back right now. Yes, we need to be at each other's back in a way that goes so far beyond what we've yet experienced. I mean, whenever I talk to retired military and they tell me, that quote really is true. I mean, I remember a retired military officer who had been 20 years out of the force, and he said, to this day, if one of my buddies calls me and says, I need you, I don't ask why, I just get on a plane. And that's the kind of being there together that, and knowing we're together, this is my newest exploration of what will it take for us to really create these very tight, strong communities where we can support each other in whole new ways.
I'm just fascinated. As I listen, I'm thinking of all the possibilities of, I don't know, connecting islands or simply supporting each other. I love that. I have a fairly practical question related to emergence, and I know that you discuss emergence in other books as well. But what struck me as I reread about emergence was the fact that in organizations we spend so much time with strategic planning. And we go from point A to B to C, and we plan 5 years ahead. And yet, given emergence, it seemed to me that these efforts could be futile, and I was wondering whether you could comment on that.
No, I think the futility of strategic plans has been so well established, even by the profession, since the 90s. People still cling to it, and perhaps they cling to it even more because it's their defense against the growing tide of uncertainty. But, in the early 90s, the Strategic Planning Association changed their name to Strategic Thinking. And then as the pace of change sped up, I saw 5-year plans just go out the window. And some of the companies I was consulting to then, which were like Nokia and such, said, well, our planning horizon is 90 days. And I think that sort of holds true. I think the reliance on strategic planning, because over the years, many, many people have asked CEOs, so does your strategic plan give valuable information to your competitors about what you're going to do? And they always laugh and say no. I think Henry Mintzberg has done some writing on that in the past that I valued. But right now, I would say that if anyone is engaging in this kind of rational, forward-looking, planned behavior, that they're doing it out of fear, and they're doing it because they don't know what else to do. Because to really cope with the levels of uncertainty and the sudden shift in economies, in populations, in all the things that trouble us in organizations these days, to really start to cope with that level of uncertainty requires a lot of skills. And instead, what I see happening, and this goes back to the lost part of Lost in a Brave New World, is we just clinging to the old maps. Mm-hmm. And those old maps are just taking us deeper and deeper into the wilderness. We are truly lost. And the behavior of lost people is to just do what they've always done, but with a greater sense of urgency and rising panic. And I think that explains a lot of behaviors in large organizations. And until we realize that the old maps aren't working, we're just going to continue this frantic nonsense about trying to plan or disengaging from people, from the workforce. More and more decisions going into the corporate suite. These are the behaviors of the lost. They just are desperate to make sense of where they are using the wrong map. And so I strongly lobby for the need to create new maps. And I've just written an article on that topic that will come out in Leader to Leader magazine in March.
Okay. I guess we're winding down to the end of our time together. I don't want to take too much of your time. I hope you forgive me to finish with a personal question since I started with one.
That's fine.
As I read your work, I am still, I guess the word fascination keeps coming back. I'm still fascinated by your voice and by everything that you have to say. And I'm wondering, how do you cope with your own uncertainties? You have to feel them. How do you cope with your own fears?
Absolutely. This is a lovely question for me to answer, because in writing the book, I felt I developed such a clear lens for seeing how bad it is that my own despair really increased as my clarity increased. And then to really understand that there is this new work for us, and it is about it is about persevering. It is about staying in the middle of the fray. It is about serving people and trying to elicit these higher qualities of the human spirit. All of that, I'm very clear, is the work going forward. But every day I hear of someone else's program who's been, defunded, or some other irrational behavior on the part of decision makers, or I don't watch the news at all anymore because I can't tolerate it. But I have to very carefully protect myself from too much information that I know plunges me into despair. So that's the sort of background. And I have a number of practices, regular meditation and long meditation retreats now that are precisely what I need in order to maintain equanimity and in order to stay calm and to not get thrown off by day-to-day craziness or destructive behavior that, I'm out in the world most of the time. And so the stories that people tell me, the grief that they share, what's happening to their programs, their work, their health, I want to be able to be there and to be there for them and not get taken down by these unending stories of irrational behavior and grief-inducing decision-making. And so I've, over the years, had to develop a very strong meditation practice so that I cultivate on a daily basis. I cultivate my own inner awareness and often my own inner sense of calm and peace. And I've had to keep upping the amount of time I spend on retreats and my daily practice. And I recommend to everyone, I say this publicly all the time now, you have to have some sort of regular practice for maintaining inner peace or inner groundedness so that you can continue to stay in the fray and in the midst of this rising insanity. So I'm saying that to every group I speak to now. You must find some kind of practice that restores your sense of grounding, centering, and peace so that you can stay, so that we don't get sick and we don't despair and just walk away from it all.
Well, Dr. Wheatley, thank you so very much for this interview. It's been lovely and really, really a blessing to listen to you. So thank you so very much.
Well, you're very welcome.
Okay.
You do very good work, so thank you.
Thank you. I will send you, as soon as I'm done with the recording and everything else, I'll send you a link so that you can watch it too.
Thank you very much.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye-bye.